I have a sobriety date. My sobriety date is April 19th of 2013. I have a sponsor. My sponsor has a sponsor, and I get the privilege of sponsoring other people, even though it doesn't always feel like a privilege. And I always kind of start with that joke because, and I put up my screen, my gallery view because usually if people don't think that joke is funny, I know I'm not with a group of people who are sponsoring enough people, because if you sponsor a lot of people, there are some that are so awesome. And then there are the ones that teach you some really good lessons about yourself, and, I'm so happy to be here. Phil, thank you so much for asking me to be of service for Alcoholics Anonymous tonight. It's a crazy, crazy world we're living in right now, and I don't get to, a lot of how we're doing AA right now has changed. And I really, really miss our in-person meetings, but this whole Zoom thing has been cool for a while we have it. And but nonetheless, always happy to be of service tonight. And because the truth of the matter is that every good thing in my life that I have today is a result of my decision to join Alcoholics Anonymous, the gift of staying in Alcoholics Anonymous. Every good thing that I have today is from AA. And so, on a Saturday night when, there's other things that we could be doing, it's always an honor and a privilege to do it because, I never want to forget where I came from. And, so I'm going to start, what we're supposed to do is when we share our story, and I'm just going to do my story tonight, is we're supposed to share in a general way what it used to be like, what happened, and what it's like today. And, I always start my story with, I grew up in a home where there was a lot of drinking. And, I say that for one main reason is that if you grow up in a home where there's drinking, you get a lot of self-knowledge as to why you shouldn't drink, and, for the longest time, you know, we always have like, we kind of like have our stories and we have what we think an alcoholic is and what an alcoholic isn't. And I just remember growing up and from a very early age, I had kind of sworn to myself that I was never going to drink. And, the reason why I did that is, the big book has this line that says, that we're Dr. Jekyll and we're Mr. Hyde. And I remember being a little kid and my dad is my hero. My dad and I are actually very close. And, but I would remember that, my dad was like this awesome father and he's a great guy. He's funny. He's hilarious. He's hardworking, and then he'd get, he'd drink and these things would happen. And I just remember like just telling myself at a very young age that I was never going to drink because, being on the other end of somebody who drinks and does the things that we drink, I just remember always thinking that, I just never wanted to do that to my spouse. I never wanted to do that to people who loved me. And it was something that I had always just told myself that, I'm just never going to drink. But the truth of the matter is if I'm a person who can swear things to myself and stick with them, you'd have a different speaker. And that's, I don't know if that's your story, but that's definitely mine. I was a person that, I would, I had all of these concessions about who I wanted to be and what I wanted to be. And I just could never stick to them. And long story short is, at the age of 13, I do pretty well in school and I get the opportunity I get this Oprah scholarship. It's a Better Chance scholarship. And I get the opportunity to go to boarding school in New England. And that's significant in my story. Not everybody gets to go to boarding school, but why that was significant for me is that my mom was a person who had immigrated from the Philippines, and, my father was an infantryman in the Marine Corps. And so the type of school where I went, one of the girls that I used to drink with was a Johnson and Johnson heir. They were people who, their families were politically connected. There was just like a lot of money there. And this was a huge opportunity for me, and it was a huge opportunity like in my family. It was a really big deal. I don't come from a family where a lot of people send their children at the age of 14 to go to boarding school. And it was just such, I can't really put into words like what a big deal that was, because where my mom had come from in the Philippines, some people immigrate to this country and they have a lot of money from where they come from. That's not the situation where it was in for my mom and her family. When my mother was growing up, she, her father had left her mother, and in the Philippines there are no social programs there. And I remember hearing stories from my mother that when the father left, my grandmother would have to go to different families in the Philippines and beg for rice so people wouldn't starve. And then they took the children, and after a while my grandmother couldn't financially support it, so they took these 9 kids and they sent 2 to live with this aunt and 2 to live with this aunt. And so this opportunity to go to this boarding school, it was huge. And it was unlike anything anyone in my family had ever experienced. And this school, it was an academically really good school. And kind of the primary purpose for people who go to these schools is they go to these schools and they're kind of these feeder schools to like Harvard and Yale and all of these, fancy schools that people like me and my family don't, had never gone to. And so I remember going to that school, and the idea was, that I was going to do well because I always did well in school. I was going to do well. I was going to graduate. I was going to go to Harvard, become president of the United States.